Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another video on my channel, Hairliciously. If you guys are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that subscribe button so you guys are updated on hair loss and hair transplant topics. Visit my website at hairliciously.com to purchase your microneedling device, which is scientifically proven to stimulate hair growth, my low-level laser therapy cap, DHT blocking shampoo and serum, hair growth vitamins, and a few other products to help those who are losing hair. So in today's video, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to kind of change things up a bit, and instead of going for the typical hair loss treatment research topic or progress of other people, I actually wanted to share with you some of the results of other YouTubers. Yes, other YouTubers who have also had their very own hair transplants. And basically, I'm going to rate their hair transplant results and just talk about some of the things that I liked or didn't like about the results. I will say that this isn't obviously to talk shit about other YouTuber hair transplants, but rather to give you guys my personal opinion on what I honestly think about the hair transplant and just to be open-minded. I'm sure there are a bunch of people who either like or dislike my hair transplant as well. And I'm not saying by any means that my results are the best, because they're not. But I do feel that everyone is entitled to their own opinions. Nobody is right or wrong. And I think some of you may eventually find it helpful to sort of be in my perspective on what I consider to be a good or mediocre hair transplant. I think it's also great to also bring about some awareness and exposure to some of these other YouTubers who you may not have heard about. And it's always beneficial to look at other results and the work of doctors in case you guys do want to see a wide range of hair transplant transformations from various newer stages. As you guys know, there's a lot of YouTubers who have presented their hair transplant journey, and I basically just thought that it'd be interesting to share with my viewers on my thoughts. I basically chose a few YouTubers who I thought were pretty active in the hair loss community, and one that kind of tend to always pop up from related hair transplant videos. So the first YouTuber I wanted to share with you is Keratin Brotherhood. I've talked to DJ a few times back and forth trying to actually do a collaboration with him and just basically talk about hair loss and our experience. And hopefully we can definitely set something up in the near future. DJ, if you're watching this, hit me up. I just sent you an email. But he's had an FUT hair transplant back in 2014 after suffering from androgen alopecia from an early age. He had some pretty extensive hair loss by his early to mid 20s, as you can see from this photo here. The hairline and mid-scalp and vertex have miniaturized, although he still has quite a lot of hair in the donor area. The good thing in his case, though, is the fact that he really has strong temporal points, these temporal points over here, which are intact. A lot of balding men also end up with receding temporal points, which need to be rebuilt. And oftentimes, the temporal points are one of the more difficult aspects when it comes to hair transplantation, because it can be challenging to get the proper angle, the hairs to be implanted, as well as the relatively natural looking characteristics of the temporal points. The hairs have to be very soft, and a lot of times when doctors implant grafts to the temporal points, using the hairs that were extracted from the back of the donor zone, the hairs can actually be a lot more coarse and thick. And that was actually also in my case. And I feel that it's very important to do it the right way the first time. And as far as DJ's temporal points are concerned, he actually has really nice extended temporal points that will come into his favor later down the road after a hair transplant. This is a recent video of him that was posted a couple weeks ago. Very nice hairline design in my opinion. I really like the juvenile hairline that he has. And given that he only had around 5,000 grafts, I believe he's got some pretty good coverage going on. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that he has curly hair characteristics, which is going to increase the illusion of more density. And this is why, black people in general can get more coverage with fewer grafts when compared to, let's say, Asians or Caucasians. And from one of his videos that I watched, he did state that he ended up going FUT strip surgery because that would be the one that would give him the most yield in terms of hair growth, or hair as well. But as a result, he does have that linear scar in the back of the donor zone. He also mentioned in a prior video that the doctor actually ran out of donor hair as he got closer and closer to the crown area during his procedure for implantation. So DJ definitely would have to get more coverage that would be required through a second hair transplant if he wanted to increase his density to the mid-scalp as well as the crown. I think after a second procedure for him, he would definitely have a much more fuller looking head of hair. And as I mentioned earlier, the existing temporal points has really helped frame his hairline. Had he had receding temporal points as well, his forehead would have looked a lot more wider because there's no hairs that's covering the sides. But he was lucky enough to maintain the temporal points. And if I were him, I'd probably also do scalp micropigmentation to the FUT scar. DJ's been disguising his scar with an eyebrow pen, which has been working out pretty well. But as you guys know, not everyone is a fan of SMP since it usually requires about 2 to 4 sessions, and it does fade over time after like 4 to 6 years. I don't think I would implant grafts into the scar tissue because there is a high possibility of the grafts not surviving when implanted into scar tissue in general. So I'd probably just go the SMP route if I were him. I'll talk a little bit more about SMP in a later video, but as you guys know, I did get my master course certification for SMP, so I am certified, and maybe the next time I do visit Korea, I can hook DJ up for a free SMP session to cover up the scar. But anyway, you know, great results and such a great improvement from where he was initially. I also know that he is taking finasteride and minoxidil, so he's got his base covered at this point, and it's all about just maintenance, and hopefully the treatment plan that he's on is able to maintain the hairs he has long term. Moving on, the next YouTuber who probably started his channel a few months after I started sharing my results is Matt Dominance. He's had 2 hair transplants up to date. The second one, which was the latest one, being a hairline repair surgery. And there's a video of that he's actually recently posted up on his channel. The first procedure that he got was in Istanbul, Turkey, and he's had some pretty extensive hair loss at an early age as well. A lot of thinning on the hairline and mid-scalp and the vertex, and I would probably place him around the Nord 5, maybe even a Nord 6. The overall hairline design he got seemed appropriate for his age, and he did go for the receded type of hairline. And honestly, it wouldn't have made sense for him to get a straighter hairline or even go lower as far as hairline placement, given the extensive, amount of hair loss that he was suffering. And it would have been unnecessary for him to lower it from what he had, because at that point, he'd be wasting grafts, which he would need to save up for future hair transplants. But the hairline design itself looks pretty good. But as he stated in his recent video, the hairline was actually not looking natural. And I totally agree, because the hairline has a lot of multi-grafts in the front, which kind of gave him that pluggy, doll-like appearance. And I also didn't really like how some of the grafts were placed outside of the hairline, sort of like random, grafts that were just kind of like implanted, trying to replicate an irregular type of hairline. Some of the other things he mentioned was that the direction and angle of some of the hairs, especially around the temporal points and also the temple regions, were not correct in terms of direction. And this oftentimes can cause issues when styling the hair. For example, it can lead the hairs to kind of be spiky or just end up in like an irregular direction. So he ended up getting a second procedure to repair his hairline, and what the doctor actually did was they extracted some of the multi-grafts that were situated on the hairline. They also extracted the random grafts that were placed outside of the hairline, which was a good move on the doctor because, like I said, it didn't look natural. And when you are reestablishing the hairline, you want to make sure that the doctor utilizes single grafts, because there has to be that soft transition on the hairline. There's no way that you're going to be able to achieve a natural looking hairline if you do end up using multi-grafts. In terms of hairline repairs, I've also seen other patients where they end up lowering their hairline a tad bit to fill in with singles in the front. But in Matt's case, as I mentioned, he really needs to save every single graft he can for future hair loss. So, obviously lowering his hairline was not going to be an option. So with the grafts that were extracted from the hairline, he didn't want to waste them. So he actually transplanted them into his crown so that the grafts would actually add more density to his thinning area. He also stated that the site where the grafts were extracted on the hairline had been healing up pretty well, which can be a concern for some people, especially dark-skinned individuals, where the scars tend to be, a little bit more visible than other people with lighter skin. But in terms of, Matt's complexion, he is pretty light, probably around a type 2 based on the Fitzpatrick scale. So I think it's healing up really well, but that's not to say that the scars won't be there, but it'll probably be more difficult to spot on someone who has a lighter complexion. And this is a few months after his second procedure. His hairline just looks so much better. I think that it looks much more natural because the multi-grafts were removed and replaced with the existing singles. So overall, he's had a pretty amazing transformation, especially for someone who was in the more advanced Norwood scale. He'll likely, like I said, need a second or third hair transplant, in my opinion, to really add more density to the mid-scalp and the rest of the thinning areas. But he is taking topical dutasteride. He did switch from finasteride to topical dutasteride, and I'm sure that he's probably using minoxidil as well with microneedling. So hopefully he's able to maintain, what he has, and overall, great repair job by the doctor. Now, the next YouTuber I want to share with you is Joe Tillman. Joe's been involved in the hair loss community for quite some time. He's basically like the grandfather of hair transplantation and goes way back when FET was first introduced. And if I'm not mistaken, He's had a total of 10 hair transplants. I believe all of them were FUT except for the last one, which was via FUE. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joe. But he's seen a lot of transformations within the hair transplantation industry and the different advanced techniques that evolved over a period of several decades. He's had several hair transplants in the early 1990s that ended up being a disaster. And then he's also had some in the early 2000s, which ended up being problematic as well as, some of the plug hairlines and, the stretched donor scars that were most likely a combination of a bad hair transplant procedure and the lack of technological advances we now see with FUE and even FUT. So if you visit his website, you can see this photo here, which depicts a pretty bad hair transplant result. Extensive hair loss, probably creeping towards a Norwood 7, and the grafts that were very poorly implanted. Too many gaps within each implant, lack of density, and if we were to see something like this nowadays, I think the doctor would probably end up getting sued or even getting fired. But fast forward to his 10th hair transplant, with some being repair work, to fill in some grafts into his existing FUT scars. The results, I think, for someone who came from a Norwood 7 is pretty amazing. And I feel like a large portion of that is contributed to his good laxity in terms of his donor area. In addition to, obviously the doctor who did his hair transplant. I believe it was Dr. Wong. But this is a short clip of him a few days after his 10th procedure back in 2019. And we can see a pretty natural looking hairline. It's very soft and we don't see any plugginess or anything of that sort in the hairline. Some people might say that, his forehead is way too large, but you guys have to realize that he's coming from a Norwood 7 with barely any hair on top. He had extensive hair loss, and oftentimes many people won't even have the privilege to end up getting 9 strip surgeries. So in other words, Joe really maximized the majority of his donor zone via FUT, and he was a good candidate. And as you guys know, FUT is probably the way to go if you want to extract the most grafts successfully. He also shared with us his donor zone, which honestly looks pretty good given that he's had multiple hair transplants. And the scar is also looking really good. It's healing up really well after some of the grafts were implanted into the scar tissue. And then a few months following his procedure, he shares with us his results. He gives us a 360 view of his hair, and I'm pretty amazed that this is someone who was previously Norwood 7 and had 10 hair transplants, with 9 being FUT. And most people won't even be able to tell that, because the scars have been blended in so well. The angles of the grafts in the hairline are flowing the right direction. The whorl on his crown also looks really good and natural. And overall, I think he's had what we can consider a successful hair transplant after years of multiple transplants. Now, the interesting thing about Joe's journey is that he did state that if he had the opportunity to go through all of his 10 surgeries again, he would actually choose not to do so. And he would actually prefer to just go ahead and shave his head, given that society is nowadays, more accepting of people rocking the shaven head or going for the bald look. And this is true for many people with advanced hair loss. Joe was an exception given that he had a successful outcome for someone who had pretty bad hair loss. And most Norwood 7s and Norwood 6s wouldn't even be content with the results of a hair transplant because, there's only so much hairs that you can extract and implant to such a large area on the scalp that has, receded. And you have people like Bald Cafe who simply choose to shave their heads. There's obviously nothing wrong with that. And if that's what makes you feel better about yourself and your appearance, then by all means, go for it. Like I myself would definitely go through the hair transplant journey again because having hair gives me confidence, and I'm sure that the majority of us would agree to this. But like I said, each to his own. You do you, and ultimately it's what makes you feel good at the end. Now, another fellow YouTuber I frequent from time to time is Kevin Mann. As you guys know, he provides a lot of good information on hair loss topics and treatments. And he too had a hair transplant via FUE a few years back to his temporal regions. This is a video of him before his hair transplant procedure. And I don't think he's really had much hair loss, anywhere else. And out of all the other YouTubers that I mentioned, he's probably had the least amount of hair loss, probably around the Norwood 2, maybe a Norwood 2.5 at the most. This is another clip of him right after the surgery, and we can see that the temples have filled in with density to create a more even type of hairline. Now, this is another clip of him after a year after his first hair transplant, and we can see the widow's peak, which he actually preferred to have to kind of give him, more of that alpha look. And to be honest, he doesn't really use the best quality camera or phone to shoot his videos, so It's a little bit difficult to kind of see exactly how his hairline would look up close. And I'm looking for things like, adequate density, single grafts to the hairline, the direction and angle of how the hairs are flowing. And it's hard to tell just because the video quality is not there. But as far as hairline design, I think it suits his facial structure well. And that minor temple recession that he had also kind of makes it look a little bit more natural as far as his hairline design. Visually, the hairline might be a little bit higher based on kind of like the length of his forehead. And if he wanted, he probably could get by lowering the hairline a bit further down by maybe a centimeter or so, to make his forehead a little bit more smaller and proportionate. But I don't think he has any plans to do so for a second procedure. But if he does decide to do that later down the road, he would be a good candidate given that his hair loss seems to be stabilized and he didn't suffer from major androgenetic alopecia in the first place. I would, however, try to rebuild the temporal points right here because they do look a little bit receded. And if he were to add in some grafts and rebuild his temporal regions, I think that it's going to really enhance the slightly receded hairline with the widow's peak. But he does tend to grow out his hair anyway, which covers most of his temples. And he's also being proactive by being a huge advocate for finasteride, as you guys already know, which I also highly recommend for those who are losing hair. So, in the end, he did get his bases covered. And overall, I think he's also had a pretty good result from what I can see. And finally, the last YouTuber who had a hair transplant that I want to share with you is Jeffree Star. I specifically chose him, although he doesn't really talk about hair loss topics on his channel. I just chose him because I think he had some pretty good results in my opinion. This is a video of him right after his FUT hair transplant in 2016. And you guys can see where his original hairline was and all those grafts that were implanted into the frontal portion of his hairline. I'd probably place him around the North 3 just because of some of the deep temple recessions that are visible. He's had a lot of coverage to bring his hairline for sure. I don't know how many grafts he used, but the hairline is pretty aggressive and I assume he was going more for that feminine type of hairline, that's kind of rounder at the temple region. He's also a good candidate for an FUT because he tends to, keep his hair long. As long as you guys can grow out the hairs to a certain length, the scar in the back is not going to be a concern for most people, but for those who do want to kind of rock that shaved or even close to, I guess, like a buzz cut, it may be visible, or it's most likely going to be visible. But in this case, like I said, it's not going to be an issue. So fast forward to a more recent video he posted last month. And in this video, he cut his hair pretty short, but not too short to the point where, it would make the donor scar visible. But looking at his hairline, man, that thing is just amazing. Great hairline design in the first place. And I think that it looks very natural. The hair seems to be going in the proper direction. And at least from what I can see on the temporal triangular regions, it looks like there's really good density because there's not much contrast between the native hairs and the implanted grafts. I don't see any plug-in type of hairline as well, which is a good indication that singles were mainly used to create the frontal portion of the hairline. Most men would not opt for a hairline like Jeffree Star. And I feel like this is more reserved for, females who tend to have larger foreheads and want to reduce the overall size of their forehead while maintaining kind of like that feminine round hairline design. But I have seen men with a full head of hair that hasn't had any hair transplants that do kind of have that round type of hairline. You would typically see, these type of hairlines in like Korean idols, who try to achieve, for that feminine look in the first place for whatever reason. But overall, I think Jeffree Star's hair transplant came out extremely well. And it's probably one of the best results that I've seen from somebody who ended up getting FUT. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for this video. There's obviously other YouTubers who have had transplants that I have not covered. But if there is a specific YouTuber that you want me to take a look at and basically just give you guys my personal opinion and my analysis, let me know and maybe I will cover it in a future video. But thanks again for everything, guys. Thanks for watching this video, for subscribing, and stay tuned for my next upcoming video. Take care.